kick off this virtual tasting then. Welcome, everyone. We were obviously hoping to be joined by Brock from Whisky Hunt Australia. Unfortunately, he had something come up at the last minute, so it's just Scott and I tonight. Obviously, Scott is our super duper knowledgeable American whiskey expert. I'm just the American. Um, so we have his expertise to help us out this evening. So he was on the barrel pick trip to Kentucky last year, and I'm the one person who's been to Texas and lived there for a bit. So we've got our bases covered.
Our
Before I
combined
dive,
knowledge, we will have more than enough to talk about.
exactly. So yeah, before I dive into housekeeping, I've got a quick question for the group. Is this anyone's first time trying Still Austin? Just like show of hands or whatnot. Oh, I see a few nods, a few hands up. A couple of shakes of the head. So yeah, Alex and Loz have tried it before. Yeah, exciting. I'm super duper excited about this. It's definitely one of the lesser known Texas distilleries, and in my personal opinion, they are the best. Sorry, Balcones. I think they're phenomenal. So before I start any turf wars, I'll go through the housekeeping. Full housekeeping video is always shared in the Zoom link email for you. Don't drink and drive is the most important pointer. That housekeeping video is always up on our YouTube channel, along with all recordings of our virtual tastings, so you can watch it back at any time, including this one when I edit it. Pop your tasting notes and questions in the chat. Obviously, in terms of questions, we'll do our best. But please add the tasting notes. I love reading them. And finally, I'll go through the tasting order just quickly for people watching back on the replay. So whiskey number one is the straight bourbon whiskey. Whiskey number two is the bottled in bond rye whiskey. Number three is the single barrel for Whisky Hunt Australia. Number four is the cask strength bourbon whiskey, and number five is the cask strength rye whiskey. So let's not delay. Let's get cracking into the first whiskey of the night. What I see, Vidal, no Tanager. I'm probably saying
I
Tanager
think
wrong.
Tanager.
Tanager. So much French for Texas. Um, But yes, unfortunately, none of that. But we will talk about that a little bit later, I reckon. So yeah, crack into your whiskey number one, the straight bourbon whiskey. And I kind of want to start tonight with a bit of a history about whiskey production in Texas. Obviously, like you don't think of the hot deserts of the Lone Star State when you think of like a good place to make whiskey. Actually, another show of hands. Has anyone here been to Texas? Alex and Loz. Oh yeah, a few people, Blair, Fraser. Yeah. It's like very like hot, dry, but I have been there when it snowed as well, so it's a very confused state. Um, but very cool. And I'll share a little bit later one of my favorite things when I was living in Plano, Texas. But yeah, one of the founders actually of Still Austin Distillery is the preeminent expert on whiskey banking and whiskey production in Texas, which is pretty cool and probably what it's inspired a lot of their releases. But the history of spirits in the state started with the production of brandy by the Spanish residents back when Texas was its own country. The state itself has been through quite a little moment in terms of independence from Mexico and then joining with the United States. But the first production of whiskey is credited to a man named Javez Fitzgerald, who was a migrant from Tennessee. So obviously familiar with distilling practices from back home, and he was distilling through the 1830s until a flood destroyed his operation in the 1840s. Um, then Texas became a state in 1845 after declaring independence from Mexico. And one of their prominent leaders, I think before they officially joined the United States, Stephen Austin, obviously what Austin is named after, he wanted prohibition. But being pragmatic, he realized that like people were just going to drink anyway, and he figured if they're going to drink alcohol, they may as well drink alcohol made in Texas. Um, so, he had a bit of economic sense about him. And Texas's first president at the time, Sam Houston, was a notable whiskey drinker and very much imbibed the spirit. So they were like, yes, people are going to drink whiskey. They should drink what's made here. So that kind of did build up a little bit of a grassroots. And then later on down the line, Texas was also the first state to put in place strict regulations around whiskey production. So in 1909, President Taft came out with definitions on what would be called a whiskey in America. And he included saying, oh, you can blend between aged whiskey and a neutral spirit like vodka. And you could still call it a blend of whiskeys. And this apparently offended the Texas Dairy and Food Commissioner so much at the time that he put a ban out on like whiskey that was defined this way. He called it Taft whiskey. And then he introduced strict standards for Texas whiskey. So they introduced minimum 44% ABV and no added sugar. So I and I think as well that kind of plays into the bourbon that we're drinking at the moment. Obviously, it's 49.2%, which is a little bit higher than you would typically have as your core entry bourbon, I think. If you're wanting to kind of like grow as a brand, typically it's at 43% type thing. So I do wonder if they're kind of following those original regulations that were put in place for Texas. But yeah, so what you guys are enjoying right now is their flagship bourbon, The Musician, that they released back in 2020, which I'm sure was great timing. They probably were like, our first whiskey is ready into the market in 2020. So, but yeah, their years of planning clearly helped push this. Uh, I mean, the years of planning, even just making it, is really indicative of like the quality and the flavor. But it ended up in its first year of release being one of the top 10 best-selling whiskeys across Texas in that year. So like they were definitely on to something good, and I'm really, really curious to see what you guys think of it in the comments. Please, how you feel in it, and then Scott, if you've got anything to add onto that about this whiskey.
I mean, straight on the nose, super creamy. I think one of the official tasting notes is brown butter, and I think the palate for me kind of aligns with that pretty well. Um, Still Austin have really made a name for themselves of being Texas whiskey without being a really intense tannin, which some other brands have really kind of put their hat on. You mentioned one of them. There's Garrison Brothers as well, and those guys they're about as Texas as you can get. They've got the Lone Star right in the middle of the bottle. But those guys are really well known for having really big, bold cask flavors front and center. But this bourbon, and I think Still Austin across the board, is much better at balancing the distillate, the kind of the mash bill kind of flavor profiles, along with the cask kind of in a bit more harmony. And I think straight away we're going to start getting our heads around that with this one, because yeah, we do get that sweetness that you'd expect out of a bourbon whiskey made in Texas with first fill virgin oak. We get some of that sweetness. We get a little bit of tannin, a little bit of spice, but there's still a lot of creaminess. It's not overpowered at all. It's great.
Yeah, 100%. It has the kind of like typical kind of kick that you would expect from a Texas whiskey. Like it still lets you know it's from Texas on the palate. But you're right, a lot of that sweetness really comes through. And I think that was what really attracted me to the brand when I first tried it. Because obviously working behind a bar, and I'd gotten to try Garrison Brothers, and I'd gotten to try Bradley. We're only on whiskey number one, the straight bourbon. Um yeah, and I'd gotten to try Balcones, and like Balcones is a niche, I think. Like it is that big bombastic, like it just it walks around with like a funny limp. Like it's you guys get what I mean by that. But yeah, and like it is
It's
that
hard
kind
to
of
meet a person from Texas and not know immediately they're from Texas. So it's a good.
true, very true. Yeah, it's the fact that it takes them like an hour to finish a sentence. The slow
Oh,
drawl.
wow. I feel like that's too far.
No, no, I've lived there. I've seen it all. Um, Vidal, thank God it's far apart from Balcones. Yeah, but yeah, and I think that yeah, Balcones has that fit, but I feel like still Austin retains that like really Texan nature while still making a really approachable style of whiskey. Like even Blair's getting that caramelized sugar and oak dark fruit on the nose. Yeah, I was definitely getting that like burnt butter. If you've ever had to like burn and brown butter for a baking recipe, it's just that permeating smell and it's sweet, but it's like it's hard to describe. But it's got so much of that on the nose, I think, like you were saying, Scott. Um, but yeah, really, really cool stuff. And I think like Texas is, I know, people kind of like make fun of Texas and the stereotypes and whatnot, but they really are a little bit like that sometimes, and you gotta love them for it. My favorite sign is under a random highway, middle of nowhere. No one drives down this road, but I used to ride my bike to the mall, and it's this just giant sign that says superior water quality in Texas. It's like, why? Who needs to know that? They're just stuck this random sign under a freeway, just telling people, hey, our water is amazing. And I'm like, no, it's not. It doesn't taste good at all. But like, it's that, I think that confidence that Texans have in whatever it is that they're making that I think really, really shines through. So, mm,
My first introduction to whiskey in Texas was actually through the Whiskey Tribe. You know, the YouTubers. They've got their own distillery. I think it's called Crowded Barrel. And that was kind of back when I first started getting into whiskey. Those guys and their content was really, really educational. And I don't think I've ever actually had a chance to try their whiskey, so I'm very interested to see how they approach it as well.
mm,
One thing definitely worth calling out on this one before we move on to the rye. The mash bill is pretty traditional. It's like a 70% corn, rye is 25%, 5% malted barley. So that's like a classic, high rye corn recipe. Um, it's a little bit higher in rye than maybe was a traditional for a high rye Kentucky bourbon, but it's also uh, not just regular corn. They're using white corn specifically. So most Kentucky whiskies will be using yellow corn or potentially even a mixture of whatever kind of corn they can get. Um, but yeah, this is specifically calling out that it's white corn, which I believe is a kind of a slightly sweeter kind of corn. And the Still Austin guys have really leaned into different varietals of corn. You might have seen some people like what's their name? New Southern Distilling, I think in South Carolina. They were some of the first to revive this old type of corn called Jimmy Red corn. It's literally like a red color. And there's even a distillery in Western Australia, Whippersnapper, that's done experiments. Actually, done a fair bit of distilling with the rye since it's been kind of revived. Sorry, that corn since it's been revived, and Still Austin have done experiments with white corn, blue corn, and this red corn as well. I think one of the ones that Vidal was referring to in the chat earlier, I think some people refer to that as kind of like the America whiskey because it actually uses red, white, and blue corn in the mash bill, as well as I think some barley. I think there's a fourth grain in the mash bill for that as well. That's like they're one of their cigar blends. Um, and they've done lots of other really cool experiments, like you mentioned, talking about all the different variations in flavor you can get from those grains. Um, one thing I wanted to call out was this actually wasn't their original plan to make this type of mash bill. They originally wanted to make a wheated mash. So right from the start, they started distilling um, on this. You're going to go into the distillation equipment a little later, but um, yeah, they originally wanted to do a wheated bourbon before they started speaking to their current master blender, we'll get into her as well. She's pretty incredible. Basically, she was tasting their wheated products, and they were going, "Cool, yeah, this is all right. Good job. Anything else you want to show me?" And they actually had a contract. They were making some whiskey for a partner they were selling contracted whiskey to. And I said, "Oh, try this, see what it's like." And then like, she just says, "Change everything. This is your mash bill going forward. You want to do this. This is your high rye. Forget about the weeded." And yeah, apparently the distiller had only been on the current master distiller had only been on board for about 3 months, and he's like, "I'm not going to tell that to the owners. You can tell that to the owners, and I'm just going to kind of stand behind you and say, yeah."
Yeah, no, I
So
love that.
I'm really glad that that's what we landed on because obviously we're getting some really cool stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, look, she was right. This is fantastic. So, yeah, we might
Fraser's
move
right.
on.
In the chat, he mentions High Wire is the name of the brand from the Jimmy Red.
Mm,
That's the kind of the brand. I think New Southern is the name of the distillery. But yeah, I've tried it. It is really cool. It's super complex. It's a little bit young, the one that I tasted, which was a couple of years ago, to be honest. So it could have changed a fair bit, but it was already really complex at quite a young age. Very cool.
mm. Well, we might move on to whiskey number two, the bottled and bond rye. Um, yeah, I think obviously start talking about like the distillery itself, is also why you guys are here. Um, but yeah, Still Austin was founded back in 2013 by three families from Austin, where the distillery is located. And I think Alex and Loz pointed out beautifully that Still Austin's vibe very much matches the city of Austin itself, which does its own thing, and they're experimental but still very Texas. Like I think they're the host of South by Southwest Music Festival and stuff like that. It is um, they often call it a blue dot in a red sea. It is a very progressive, democratic little city surrounded by the Republican. Who knows? Oh, it might be changing with the midterms. Anyway, not what we're talking about. But yeah, so Chris Seals, who heads up the business as the CEO, alongside the guidance of his father, Cleveland, which is a great name, can I say? Cleveland Seals. Perfect. Anyway, they don't name kids like that anymore. But yeah, Cleveland was hunting for a post-retirement project, and he had the initial wild idea to set up a distillery. And I'm convinced that men retiring is the number one cause of distilleries in the world. Um, but apparently, initially, Chris, who was like an economist specializing in risk analysis, went along with his father's plan, being like, okay, well, let's do a feasibility study to see if we can actually make the distillery work, um, before we commit. And so they went on this jaunt around distilleries, looking into production processes, meeting distillers, and having a really fun time. And Chris's kind of real plan was that it would be a fun hurrah for them as a father-son duo, who they kind of lost their connection after years. And Chris was convinced that, like, yeah, it would just be a fun thing, and he'd talk his dad out of it because it wasn't going to work. But that clearly was not how the story went. Turns out when you put men and whiskey in a room together, they start talking. And the experience of doing this kind of travel brought them closer together. And then the state laws changed in Texas, making it easier to open a craft distillery. And they decided to commit to the project. So they brought on some friends, the Salinas and the Braunbergs. So um, obviously, being part of the distillery was the inspiration for Andrew Braunberg's book, published back in 2023, about the history of Texas whiskey. I think it's like fires, floods, and something. But yeah, history of Texas whiskey. I really want to get my hands on this book. Um, but they began construction on the site in 2014, and they kind of put sustainability and water conservation in mind. So it was a really big project. They didn't actually complete building the distillery until 2017. So first liquid and the earliest liquid from the distillery is 2017. Being Texas-based, Austin-based, they wanted to be both eco-conscious and water-conscious because the state is prone to droughts, even though a Texan environmentalist is somewhat of an oxymoron. But they source 100% of their ingredients from family-owned farms within the state as well for their grain to glass production style. Their Texas is very heavily farmland, but I can't imagine it was that easy finding rye growers in Texas. But yeah, they very much wanted to make it as in-state as possible. And yeah, I think that kind of builds into the reason as well that their whiskey is some of the best coming out of the state. I know that a lot of the other Texan distilleries do use local grains, but yeah, I think that these guys clearly have their ducks in a row in terms of where they're sourcing the grain from, and then obviously bringing on talented distillers and blenders to really craft it. So the bottled and bond releases were actually a 2023 product, so they're still kind of like technically relatively new to the market. But yeah, the straight bourbon, bottled and bond rye, they're core range whiskeys now, which is very, very exciting. I'm going to pour out my whiskey because I've been talking, so I haven't had time to pour it out and smell it like I've been watching Scott do and getting very jealous. Ah.
Yeah, I'm enjoying myself. Don't worry about me over here. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you mentioned that it could be difficult to find Texas growers, and I'm not sure how difficult it was, but it might be a bit of a risk for the distillery because they get all of their rye, as far as I'm aware, from a single farm, from one family that runs that farm. Um, I think they purchase a lot of their grains through a Texas-based maltster, who'll do all the malting for them. But I believe all of the rye, all of this specific type of rye, it's Brasetto rye, which is just a strain of rye which is known for being a little bit light. There's a Brutzi rye, which is a little bit more spicy, and there's some other variations as well, which I don't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, that is a very specific type of rye that they really were chasing. So they wanted that Brasetto style, and yeah, there is only one family that they're sourcing all of that from, which is pretty cool. And yeah, you can straight away, as soon as you put your nose in it, you get some rye notes, and then on the palate immediately you go, oh, this is actually a lot softer than you probably might have expected out of an American rye, particularly an American rye which is aging in such a climate like Texas. I think we've been trained over the past 10 years or so when rye has really kind of had a massive resurgence, as far as kind of drinking straight, not just having it in cocktails. Everyone thinks rye equals spicy. And there's been a lot of reasons why that's the case, partially just due to one major distillery in Indiana, which has produced product which usually people associate with spiciness, and kind of some very approachable products from that distillery that have been released by people I'm not going to name. And so rye has kind of been synonymous with spice for a lot of people for a long time. And it's really cool to see a few different distillers that are showcasing that it doesn't have to be just a real big kind of punch in the face as far as herbal. I mean, there's still mintiness in this to a degree on the nose. I kind of got mint straight away on the nose. There's still herbal characters, but it's not necessarily just a kind of a bomb that hits you and kind of doesn't let go, even at 50% ABV. So we can go into the details of kind of how different rye characteristics can come out in different degrees of production, but I'm pretty sure that the Brasetto style, the Brasetto species of rye is a big part of that as well here.
Yeah, I definitely get what you mean with that mintiness. It's that like after you've had a Fisherman's Friend mint, like something like quite intense, and then you kind of breathe out, it's that that kind of sharpness of the mint across, but like even when it's on your palate, it still feels soft. It doesn't feel abrasive. I have a suspicion that I personally prefer rye made anywhere but Kentucky. I have a soft spot for Virginia produced rye. Love the stuff coming out of Maryland and whatnot. So yeah, this has that kind of delicate softness, even though it still has a lot of that classic rye spice profile. It's just subdued a little bit, but in a pleasant way. Yeah.
Yeah, like something that's definitely worth calling out is this is 100% rye. It's not a I mean 95% rye, 5% barley is the one that I've been referring to from MGP in Indiana that's become synonymous with rye styles in America. So people assume that that high spice level is because of it's 95% rye, but the Kentucky ryes that you're talking about sometimes they're only 51% rye. So the question is, where does the softness and kind of more approachable flavor come from? Is it is it from the mash bill? You would kind of think that, and some people do think that if I just reduce the amount of rye in my rye, I'm going to get a less spicy product. I'm going to get a little bit more sweet, and the corn is going to bring you some of that sweetness, and the barley is kind of just going to be pretty clean flavors and kind of softer flavors. But it's not necessarily true that, you just reduce the amount of rye in there and you're going to reduce the amount of spice. There's lots of, particularly in fermentation, the way that the rye responds to lots of, like the long chain fatty esters and all the different chemical stuff that I'm nowhere near qualified enough to speak on. But there's some specific characteristics that I think can really be accentuated during fermentation and then further accentuated during distillation. And there's these guys I always forget where they're from. They recreated the 3-chamber pot still in, I think it might be Colorado. Basically an old style of distillation from, basically pre-prohibition. And they're trying to prove once and for all that rye whiskey doesn't necessarily have to be spicy, and a big part of it is the way that you treat in fermentation and distillation. And if you kind of treat it really carefully, you can get some really cool, really delicate flavors out of rye, not just spice.
Yeah, I suspect as well it might have something to do with kind of my closest comparison is gin. So I helped a gin distiller in making her one of her signature products, and her thesis, her master's project was seeing how different botanicals changed and affected the flavor of other botanicals. And I think it could be potentially a similar thing in mash bills, because obviously you don't have that issue in 100% single malt malted barley whiskies from Scotland. But when you're introducing multiple different grains and in different percentages and then different strains of those grains, um, that can really heavily affect the flavors. Like my friend found that when she added one specific botanical to lemon myrtle or whatnot, it made the whole thing taste like oyster shells. Like no matter what, if those two botanicals were next to each other, but alone, they didn't taste anything like oysters. Like they had just completely latched onto each other and created a different ester profile. So yeah, I do kind of wonder if it is that thing of we are getting the softness of 100% the grain, the Texan grain of rye, and if that is perhaps what influences the flavor. But great notes from Blair. Loves the nose, rice spice, fresh herbs, orange peel. Great call. Small hints of caramel on the palate, baking spice, cinnamon, and zesty honey. Definitely. Um, Ollie 100% rye mash bill. Yeah, it's hard to believe that, but I think it just genuinely comes down to the rye itself. Um, Scott Fraser asked a question, is it a mix of rye and malted rye, like unmalted and malted, or I think it's 100% malted.
They don't specify, but I know that they do some experiments with malted rye. So it very well could be a combination. Technically, it's quite difficult to distill 100% unmalted rye. That's the reason that famous recipe 95-5 exists, because the 5% barley does really help kick off that fermentation. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some malted rye in this mix, but they don't call that out specifically. It's potentially that it's just a little bit too niche of interest for them to call it out in the label. I can definitely do a little bit of research there, but I would not be surprised if a portion of it is malted. I wouldn't be surprised if all of it was malted, to be honest, because the malting process really does often soften and bring a lot of kind of sugars to the fore. So it could very well be 100% malted rye.
Mm. Yeah, fair enough. Well, stuff for Scott to research on a busy weekend.
Oh,
Real.
and yes, it was a distillery in Colorado I was referencing. It's the Leopold brothers.
Oh
There's
yes. Yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
been a few experiments, and I think some core range stuff they've just started releasing. Yeah, so those guys are the ones. Actually, Andrew in the chat gave me a sample of one of their experiments, which was a collaboration between them and George Dickel.
Oh, George Dickel, another underrated distillery. But we might move on to whiskey number 3, and I think Ollie has hopped on just in time to tell us about this.
Oh, you want me to actually talk, yeah?
You don't have to. We can get Scott to talk, but
Look,
all I know is I don't know about this whiskey.
so for those who don't know, we work very closely with Brock and the team at Whisky Hunt Australia, and they started up a business that's very popular in the States. The concept is called barrel picking. The business is just focused on picking a single barrel, exclusively bottled for Australia. They bring it over, and every 2 years, Brock usually jumps on a tour. I can see Andrew Christie's on the call today, so him and Scott and Brock and Jez, Whiskey Fight, some people I know, jumped on the last tour. When did you go? April last year. And jumped basically the whole Kentucky tour, distillery trail. And Brock flew in a couple of days early because he has a cousin or a brother or someone living actually in Austin. So they jumped in a car, drove down to still Austin, and basically said, "Hey, can we do a barrel pick?" They've been chatting on Instagram for like 5 years, and but yeah, still Austin has not done any work outside of the States. We're actually the very first market in the world outside of USA to get a barrel pick. They are launching in Germany and where else did they say? I think UK this year potentially. So it's amazing barrel pick. You can see it says bottled exclusively for Whisky Hunt Australia. Natural cask strength 52.42%, 104 proof essentially. I don't know if you got the video handy of them doing the barrel picking, but basically they took him through the whole journey, all the samples, and they took him out the back to amazing bond store, the warehouse, and then they just had a selection, I think, a dozen different casks, and just pulled samples straight out and a little table, and then basically Brock just gave the nod and said they just wrote Australia on it. That was it. So that's as simple as picking our cask, and then hand it over to us as we do all the logistics, or the import, or the warehousing, dispatch. So Brock does the fun job of signing off on it and saying this is a very good pick for us, and yeah, send us an email, goes, "Ollie, this is a cask, please pay for it, let's get it over here and pay excise and duties." And shipping whiskey out of the States is complicated before the current administration. So this is the first cask we've got during the current administration. It's been sitting, just dealing in paperwork for quite some time. But the fact, one thing that surprised us, and I'm happy to disclose it on the call, they didn't tell us they sent us the whole barrel with it. So customs doesn't like wood arriving into Australia. They said, due for inspection. I said, fine, we get custom inspections all the time. And then they said, can you please give documentation for your wood has been fumigated, sorry, for pests. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's boxes of whiskey. sure it's potentially classed as a dangerous good with a high ABV and stuff. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they go, no, there's a 200 litre ex bourbon cask here. And I'm like, well, what is this? And then yeah, it's still awesome. They thought because they've never done exports to other markets, but as barrel picking is common in the States. Usually, you walk into a retailer in the middle of the highway, you're being in the middle of nowhere, and there's a barrel, and then people selling the whiskey, and that's how you do barrel picking. So still Austin just assumed let's just send the barrel down to Australia. So it's an amazing barrel. I've been chatting to a New South Wales distiller who is going to fill it with some amazing projects. He'll be coming to the Canberra Whisky Show this weekend. So I've asked basically, we'll give you the cast, but we want first dibs of whatever you put in it, basically. So starts with an A. I'll leave the rest of it as a bit of a surprise, but I can see Andrew Christie's already.
Yeah, Andrew's like, I know.
But yeah, we're very excited to see what Rod and the team come up with in terms of that cast. But as far as I believe, it is the very first still Austin ex bourbon cask ever brought into Australia. I reached out to a couple of cooperages and they didn't even know what the hell I was talking about. They said, what is a still Austin? Yeah, very cool to actually continue the project on in that sense. But yeah, let me know what you think in terms of the flavour. This was my bottle that I've shared with a few people, but I very much love my cask strength bourbon. And am I allowed to say the next bit? Maybe. I'm not the biggest fan of Texan whiskey.
Oh no, don't worry. I already covered that with Turf Wars talking about how I think this is still Austin's the best Texas whiskey out there.
I'm very much, on the other states, Kentucky, Tennessee, Maryland, etc. But this has swayed me in the other direction. I'm very impressed with what Brock has done here. So well done to him.
Yeah, definitely pop tasting notes in the chat. I'm really, really keen to see what you guys think of this. But I just get like beautiful, like freshly polished boots, like leather, freshly polished leather, like that lovely like aroma. Um, it's very rich in a way that like I really appreciate. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, like this is the most kind of Texas whiskey that we've seen so far in this tasting. This is the kind of like, even though it does have its own character to it, it does still carry on some of those lighter flavor profiles. We do get a nice, pretty full flavored punch of kind of rich spice. I'm not sure if anyone else got it on the nose, but again, I was kind of shocked that there was a little bit of a minty note immediately for me again on this one on the nose. And yeah, the palate has just that explosion of spice without being too overly tannic. So yeah, the identity of Still Austin seems to be kind of carrying through even up to 7 years old. And I know the guys are working on 10-year-old products. They're kind of excited to be able to do that in the future. But this is kind of the closest to what you might expect immediately when you're looking for a Texas whiskey. You've got a punch of flavor, but we've got a lot of balance in here as well, which is really cool.
Yeah, 100%.
Something that there's so many ways we could go with this. I heard, Ollie, that essentially from Brock, the tasting was over, the barrel pick was over. He'd gone, yeah, this is a good barrel. He'd picked one, which wasn't actually this barrel, and he was like, "Thanks, guys, that was awesome." And they're like, "Actually, do you want to just check out the back and see what's out there just as well?" And he was like, why not? And yeah, they cited the barrel, and I'm not sure if you have a photo of it, Ollie, but the barrel actually had quite a lot of drips down the side, where potentially like whiskey had either been sampled over the course of the. Oh yeah, there we go. You can see those black drips down the side. Either it means there's been a leak and kind of the sugars from the wood have kind of repaired the leak, or potentially it means that someone's had a sample every now and then, because those barrels you can't kind of dump them when they're standing up like that and take little samples. You have to kind of drill into the side and then plug it up again. So it's possible that barrel got sampled more often than the rest of them, and they said, this probably means it's a good one. It's like I think Booker No was famous for kind of picking casks in a lineup that had kind of all of the dust kind of off them because lots of the warehouse guys were kind of leaning over and pulling, drawing out of the bunghole and obviously cleaning up that cask more so than others. So sometimes there's little clues in the distillery when you go, actually, this one has been sampled a few times. It must be all right.
I might ask Andrew if he doesn't mind chiming in. How do you find barrel picking as a process? You obviously tagged along. I know what Scott's feelings are, but in terms of yeah, how did you find picking barrels on your trip?
Bloody awesome. It's if you're really into your whiskey drinking, and it's the next level. It's what you want to do. You want to understand the nuances between different barrels and what you might look at, and to pick something that really suits you, and then wait for it to arrive in the country is pretty damn good too. Yeah, no, it's really good. And obviously, the ones that we did were a lot of fun. Some more detailed than others. Some were just a bit haphazard, and some were really detailed. It was good.
When you say detailed, do you mean we had a method and some of them are just like it looked like we walked in and went, that's the best one.
No. It's fairly easy from our point of view. You go in there and you pick something that you think is really, really good and works for your palate. So it's easy for us. But I mean, from the distillers or the distillery staff that we're working with, some of them had a real method to the madness. And some were, a bit like what's happened to Brock there. They said, "Oh, do you want to go and try this out as well?" So some were very detailed, pretty much had barrels laid out, samples picked, and other ones, let us go a little bit more wild. I like the wild bit.
Yeah, us too.
Yeah, so cool. It's yeah, definitely something I want to get around to at some point, heading over to the States, but maybe not at the moment.
Even in
Yeah, I love Fraser, I love your tasting notes. Oak, mint. I think, yeah, you said that mintiness before. I'm getting like a little bit of spearmint lollies, that like the sweet, sugary mintiness. Hint of baking spices, orange peel, Madeira, vanilla, absolute ripper. Kudos to the picking team. Yeah, we'll pass on the love to Brock. We might move on to whiskey number 4, which is the
For
cask
you
strength
too,
bourbon.
Emma. We should
Hmm?
call out that there's probably only about 5 bottles left of this whiskey hunt pick. I
Oh,
don't know if they've been set aside, and you might have to ask Ollie or Chris if you guys want to send an email. But I believe that there's very very little left.
well, all right. Well, I'll share the link in the chat now then. See if anyone will go straight for it. But I'm all over it like an American on a donut. Um, but yes, so we'll move on to the cask strength bourbon. But one thing that I really like want to pick up as well is the labels for these bottles are beautiful. I think they are probably some of my favorite whiskey labels. So, which one are we doing? Yes, the cask strength. So yeah, the bourbon expressions feature on the label a character that they call the musician, and then the ryes are a character that they call the artist. They also produce a gin called the naturalist, but obviously that's not on our lineup. And the labels are all created by local Austinite. I believe that's the word they use for them, but Austinite, Mark Burkhart. He was asked to paint a series of portraits that give people an impression of still Austin as a people and a place. Um, I will admit as well, I do feel a little bit crazy when we first put this tasting on, and I actually got like a proper look at the labels. I was like, wasn't she holding a gun? I was certain that there was an early release of the label where she was holding like an AK-47 type style gun or shotgun or something like that. Um, I have been searching and looking, and I have not found any evidence at all. So I'm simply convinced now that I never actually properly looked at the label. But tell me, doesn't it look like she's holding something that's missing there, and now it's her hair? Anyway, uh, rant
Well, if
over.
she's a musician, you'd assume it would be a guitar.
Well, that's what I thought. I was like, maybe, like, maybe it was a guitar, and I was just thinking, you were like, yeah, Bradley, a banjo. Um, and maybe I was thinking about it wrong. So yeah, here's some of the other ones, the blue corn and the red corn. Um, but yeah, I maybe it was just me, but I always looked at that label not properly and was like, yeah, 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 Texas whiskey. She's holding a she's holding a firearm. But yeah, I think the labels are really, really beautiful. And they've really kind of brought that creativity to their whiskey as well. Like Scott said, their head distiller, John Shripple, has been experimenting with grain varieties, and we saw the red corn and the blue corn releases in there. And yeah, I believe that the Whippersnapper release with the Jimmy Red corn was what won them like one of the best corn whiskies in the world or something in an awards. So yeah, apparently Chris Seals, the CEO, later said that he might not have greenlit the projects for the red corn and the blue corn if he knew how much money it was going to cost them. He was like, "Oh, this is spennier than I thought. Oh, this grain experiment." But then when they released the red corn, he changed his mind and was worried that they didn't actually make enough because it was so popular. I think I have seen a bottle out in the wild. I might have tasted it. I can't remember. But yeah,
Whiskey
one
Melman, I
process.
think, had one, Emma.
Yeah, I think it was on the bar at Whisky and which was actually hand carried back by one of the staff members. He acquired it from his partner's Texas family, Texas-based family. Her family's from Austin. So they had been given it when they were visiting for Christmas one year. So, um, but yeah, I think it's really, really cool. And one kind of process, one experiment process that they've done, which Scott kind of touched on before, is for their Canniger cigar blend. It's probably the coolest experimentation. I had never heard of it before this, but it's using a French technique called petit eau, which is common in early Armagnac production. It just means little water. Um, and given obviously the hot Texas climate, and in particular the inconsistency of weather in Austin, that active maturation can be really finicky to like factor into their production and make sure it doesn't overwhelm, particularly with these like cask strength variations that we're tasting now. But instead of just reducing the proof with normal water at the end of the process before bottling, like some distillers would do, um, part of it is that they add small amounts to the barrel periodically over a few months towards the end of the maturation. So they'll add the water as it goes, which some distilleries do that process. Uh, some distilleries will like just add the water in at the start and then mature it all together as one. But the key difference with Petit O is that when a barrel is emptied, they leave a little bit of the whiskey left in it and then they fill it mostly with water. And that kind of gives them barrel aged, watery, slightly boozy water. Um, they age that and then they use that to do the small amount addition to a subsequent barrel to a future barrel to proof it down. So it's like getting extra contact with the esters and the sugars in the wood. And yeah, I think that's probably also why they get a softer mouth feel. But the Tanager was definitely kind of the first to use the slow addition of water and the slow addition of the aged water process. So we will be bullying Ollie and the Whiskey Hunt Australia guys to get us a bottle of the Tanager one day. But yeah, it really, really cool, very interesting process. And I think Scott can really talk more to their master blender and her kind of approach to this experimentation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know that the Still Austin crew would be super upset with us if we didn't really fully address this particular kind of part of what they do. Yeah, that I actually don't know the French term that you're referring to, but you know, sometimes they refer to it on their website as like so slow proofing. And how did you spell that?
Petite O,
Yeah, EAU.
P-A-U-X.
Ah,
Don't
okay.
forget the X, the silent X, which is always there in French terms. Don't worry, I flunked out of French class. I will put it in the
So,
chat for everyone to see.
so this the Still Austin guys would say this is one of the major things that separates them from other Texan distilleries. And I'm not 100% sure if it's only in that kind of final stages towards bottling. I think they actually do it a lot throughout the entire maturation because Texas is not dissimilar to Australia in that our whiskey maturation climate is quite dry. So not only does Texas go through some insane temperature fluctuations, we've probably seen the news of some of those kind of big freezes in Texas where basically they lose power for weeks at a time sometimes.
Yep, and the
Um,
governor runs away. Yep.
Um, but obviously, Texas is known for being very hot as well. So those huge variations in temperature create a lot of kind of in and out extraction of oak from the wood, but also the high dryness means that the proof is going up in the barrel over time. So the problem with aging high proof whiskey in a hot climate is that the higher the proof in the barrel, the more kind of bitter and heavy kind of compounds you start to draw out of the oak. So oak has water soluble compounds which only dissolve and kind of go into the water, and it has alcohol soluble compounds. So obviously we think of alcohol as being really good at extracting flavor from things. You can make an infusion just by throwing some stuff into some booze. Um, and essentially, as that equation starts to favor the alcohol, obviously, kind of from the start, it's going in at like 59% ABV, I think, with these guys. So majority of, majority already is alcohol. But if you let it just keep going and going and going, you start to get more and more extraction of these heavy flavors from the alcohol extraction, and less of the lighter flavors, which can be extracted from the water soluble compounds. So what they do is, instead of letting it go, they will kind of essentially slowly make sure they bring it back to this equilibrium, or this particular area that they like. So the master blender that you referred to there, her name is Nancy Fraley. And honestly, the more I read about Nancy, the more I want to meet her and hang out with her. She's a musician. She's actually plays bass. So, woman after my own heart. And I've seen like her Instagram. She posts like a bass or kind of guitar and whiskey pairing. So she picks one of her guitars and she puts it next to a bottle that she's got. She goes, "These two go together," which I love. I love that. But she went and studied blending in France. So she studied under some pretty serious Armagnac and cognac houses. And she learned this whole philosophy, which she brought back to the States, which is this kind of dosing with water is a part of it. And basically, the philosophy is called élevage. Yeah, basically, it means the bringing up. So it's like taking care of the casks as it matures. So very similar to how like brandy and armagnacs and cognacs can go for decades in quite a hot climate. If you've been in France in summer, it's not cold. It's nothing like aging in Scotland. So yeah, France essentially there are lots of techniques in the industry there that designed to take the kind of this product and make it age in this really relaxed kind of environment with slightly more water or different kind of humidities. The Still Austin guys, they don't do anything to change their warehouses. They don't cool their warehouses, climate control them. I believe it's just pretty standard, kind of what you would expect racks of barrels, kind of sometimes stored upright, sometimes stored on their side. They're not really protecting from the Texas elements. So what they're entirely relying on is this process and taking care of these casks over their aging to make sure that they just don't start to really get too much tannin and heavy flavor profiles extracted from the wood. So it's a lot more involved, and they've kind of set themselves up for a lot of work. But it's a really cool process. I'm glad to see it, particularly in this climate, because it makes sense. And I'm also actually glad to see that Ollie has somehow offered that remainder of that cask to the only distiller in Australia that I know that is interested in also the exact same kind of maturation style. So I messaged him this afternoon actually, and I was like, mate, you should check this person out. Like, Nancy seems like she's like a badass. Like, I think like it would be even really cool to see if they tried to do like a little collaboration or something, because he has a very similar methodology when it comes to producing whiskey in Australia. So it's cool to see those kind of things almost happening independently, getting applied to American whiskey and getting applied to Australian whiskey. It's obviously there's something to it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as well, like that process of like the slow water addition, élevage, um, like when we think about whiskey, we think of it in terms of like American whiskey typically doesn't tend to be over like 18 years old. But when you are talking about Armagnac and Cognac that typically sit in the barrel for 30, 40, 50, to sometimes 60 years, like I think that's where that being cautious of tannins and stuff like that and trying to introduce as much softness into the product as possible is kind of really important. So I imagine that like doing it towards the end of maturation makes more sense as a traditional Armagnac technique. But in Texas, they would do it like, for that entire maturation. But yeah, I think it's such a cool thing. And yeah, like you're right. Of course, the distillery that has ended up with this barrel is someone who is equally as fond of French distilling techniques as them. So, or in French maturation techniques. So, yeah, I really, really can't wait to see where that goes. Ollie's just put up a photo of the warehouse. Uh, n Not a traditional rick house, but a more modern standard way of maturing barrels in America. Um, but yeah, palletizing, which is a very nice word for it. But
I've been staring at this picture for like 6 months until Scott mentioned like the way the barrels have been stood up. I completely went over my head. But yeah, the majority of them, it's not the common way of stacking your barrels like that, right?
The States, it's very common, as far as kind of newer distilleries that don't have the resources to have rick houses. Rick houses are by far the best way to mature whiskey in the States. Just there's a huge amount of airflow that you get around each individual cask. You look at those casks there, and you can see that potentially, yeah, they've separated the rows somewhat to probably increase that airflow, but also, and there's a lot of space around them, which is great. So there probably is a fair bit of airflow, but the rick houses have been kind of made particularly in Kentucky, by a company called the Busiks for it must be at least 80 years now. Like they've been doing it for a very long time, and the patent for the rick house goes back to I think the early 1900s, maybe even a touch earlier. So that is the traditional style, the rick houses, but they are very, very labor intensive and expensive to make. And essentially, the best people in the States to make those have a waiting list that goes very, very long. And there are people who have rick houses outside of Kentucky, but it's a little bit more rare. So I know there's these guys in, I think it's Wisconsin, way up north, Dancing Goat Distillery. they have the only rick house in their state. There are a number of other distilleries around the states that have rick houses, traditional style of maturation, but the majority of modern distilleries are probably using palletized or a mixture of both. But if you want to have the aging on your site in your environment, sometimes rick houses aren't necessarily practical.
Yeah. I mean, even here in Victoria, Starwood Distillery matures a lot of their barrels palletized now, the ones that are on site at the distillery anyway. But we might move on to whiskey number 5. Andrew says
Can we
he's
just say how tasty that was? That was really cool.
It was really tasty. The bourbon. It was like, yeah, distinctly. I think you were saying the single barrel pick was like the most Texas whiskey we've tasted. I think the cask strength bourbon definitely overtook that in the profile and the style. But we'll move on to the cask strength rye. But yeah, I think Scott, do you know much about kind of, their plans moving forward at the distillery? Because obviously I think Ollie was saying that again, Australia is really kind of the first market to get a barrel pick, to get much whiskey at all, really, from still Austin. Yeah, I'm curious to know if you guys are aware of like future plans for, pushing out to the rest of the world or anything like that.
Not necessarily. Um, I think potentially, yeah, we don't need to go too much into economics, but there's lots of distilleries right now that are trying to diversify and do a lot more kind of sales outside of their own local market. That's the same for Australia, to be honest. A lot of Australian distilleries are hoping they can find markets outside of Australia to buy their whiskey, and the same goes for people in the States. Essentially, if one country has some economic problems, you want to make sure that there's other countries that are interested in your product as well. So yeah, I'm sure that Still Austin have their eyes set on Australia, and we'll be chasing them down to get them to some whiskey shows in particular, because it's obviously, it plays really, really well, and I think you can imagine tasting an Australian whiskey or tasting a Scottish whiskey and then coming across and tasting some of this kind of product at a whiskey show would actually still stand up really well, kind of in combination of lots of other cask strength and big, bold flavor profile products. But I don't know specifically if they have any plans to really make a splash in Australia yet.
A lot of sorry, I'm just jumping in. Speaking to their team, a lot of their whiskey just sold out. So they're not ready at maturity to have that supply demand. They have to keep their local Texan customers happy first and foremost. People supporting them from the get go. So yeah, they will eventually start looking at wider markets, but for them, they've just been growing their stocks. And obviously whiskey takes time to grow. Did you I missed at the beginning? Did you talk about the University of Texas and their connections there? So
Yep,
Nancy, as far as I understand, she is working with the local biology team there and farmers, where they are, and this isn't a new concept. The distillers all around the world are doing it, but they're trying to find the heritage grains that Texas grew from the very beginning, and they're starting to grow paddocks, and a lot of them only had like 5 or 6 samples in their seed bank, so they're bringing back these heritage barley, rye and corn type. And yeah, like I said, they're not the first distillery to do this, but they are working directly with the University of Texas. There's dozens of students doing their masters and doctorates on this project, so they're very, they wanted to just grow a paddock or to grow like a meter off it, and then next harvest they can. So it takes multiple years. You get a small seed bank. You can't just have a whole harvest to actually cultivate. You have to take it on a journey over multiple harvests. So it does take them multiple years. But then, like we talked about the blue and the red corn type, that's just corn. They're playing with all kinds of different things, and the fact that that's a big part of their innovation is working with the academics there, because they're sitting on this amazing seed bank, and a lot of seeds or types of grains went out of use because they are pests, like they get eaten by birds or locusts very easily or whatever it is. Their weather, like lack of weather resistance, terrible starch to alcohol ratios. So you make less liters of alcohol based on just how much there are better types that are grown today that use less water, for example. So for all these reasons and more, the different types of grains have just become out of fashion, and the universities do keep these seed banks. But the thing that's noticeable is flavor. Imagine you trying a whiskey that was made 100, 200 years ago. That's what they're chasing here. So it's exciting to see that a lot of those future projects will come into fruition at some point soon.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, I just seen Blair's tasting notes and whatnot, the mintiness, bright rye, caramelized sugars. I'm getting this kind of lemongrass thing to it on the nose as well. But maybe that's just me. I did have pad thai the other night, so my
I
brain's
interpreted that as like lemon oil that you might expect kind of like in a cola, like actually a little bit of kind of cola
yeah.
notes.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I might, now that we've tasted all whiskeys, I might run the poll. You can pick your top two favorite whiskeys of the evening, as we enjoy this last one. But yeah, I'm really curious and really excited to see this grain, a heritage grain project, move forward with the University of Texas. I will say I'll give it to them. UT, great university. Like really well-renowned university in the States. And really exciting to kind of see it come to fruition. I mentioned as well, a lot of these grains just ended up being pushed out by our more modified not necessarily genetically modified, but like genetically um bred types of grains, I suppose you could say. Like, a banana 200 years ago does not look anything like a banana now, um, just through pure genetic breeding of trees. But yeah, it would be really, really cool and interesting to see how, what people were eating, drinking, and whatnot all those, a century or more ago, is changed. So really, really cool. Um, Alex and let's say the Burrell. I will say Burrell. Don't think I didn't catch that in your video, Scott. I I I heard you mock me for saying Burrell, and I will not give it up, considering how much French there was tonight. But yeah, the seagrass comparison was made here. Not as extreme as that, but a little bit apricot. Yeah, it definitely has like the stone fruit pit, like the apricot pit. Um, but do not say Burrell. I will say it to your face, Vidal. Um, I think it's silly,
At least roll your R's, Emma. Barrel.
Burrell. But then it's like, yeah, Burrell, yeah. Because I mean, realistically, for me, talking about whiskey, I feel like it could easily fall into a who's on first joke. I like barrel whiskey. Well, yeah, they're all barrel whiskeys, so that's why I say it different, and I will not be convinced otherwise. Um, Fraser says ryes are obviously very subjective, but then this is so good. One of the personal best ryes that he's had. Absolutely phenomenal. Um, Probably very little burn. Yeah, I think the cask strength bourbon had a lot more punk and burn to it than this rye has. I mean, that's just kind of my um palate and how I've sort of tasted it. But yeah, it's really, really soft for a cask strength rye. Like you could have a couple of these and not realize at all. But yeah, super, super, super good. I think we got almost everyone has voted in the poll. So I will close it. It's done and dusted. And I will insert the drum roll here to reveal the results. And I will say, despite no love for the straight bourbon, I loved the straight bourbon. I think it is one of my favorites. But I can also see, oh, I can hear you, Scott. I can also see how the single barrel pick and the cask strength rye absolutely were standouts for you guys. Um, and then, yeah, the cask strength bourbon coming in second, the bottled in bond rye coming in third. And then, yeah, I will give my love to the straight bourbon, even though I can't vote. Alex and Love's cask strength bourbons feels like the straight bourbon on steroids. Yep, sure. Simon also loved the straight bourbon until the cask strength came out. Very, very fair. That is makes a lot of sense. But thank you guys so much for joining in tonight. I know we've gone a little bit over time wise, and I was so worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about without Brock here, but Scott and I could just talk about American whiskey for hours and hours, so I should not have been so worried. But yeah, it was absolutely wonderful having you guys hop on and hearing from Andrew about his barrel picking experience as well. Hopefully, I think, Scott, do you know if there's plans for another American tour next year or something?
If there was going to be one, you guys know where to find it. The rewards members, you'll find out about it first. But we really do love involving people in the Whiskey Hunt Australia barrel picks, whether we're going to the States or not. Right from the start, Whiskey Hunt Australia was a community first and a barrel picking kind of thing second. So yeah, we're all kind of excited about kind of hunting down great whiskies, and we definitely love including the community. That's why we loved taking Andrew and Jez and welcoming a few other people in Kentucky. But we've also done, sometimes some tastings, open tastings, sometimes kind of closed tastings. If you think you got the chops and you want to be involved, obviously reach out to us, and we do love sharing the experience of picking barrels. And it's the community that picks the barrels. It's not just one or two people. So Andrew definitely had his say and was able to kind of help us with our decisions in the States, and we've done that the same kind of thing in Australia here as well when we get samples sent across. So yeah, please stay as in part of the community, and we'd love to do some more barrel picks with you, and you can be sure that there's some more cool stuff from that particular Kentucky trip that's coming. And obviously we'd love to be back in the States as soon as possible, but yeah, we'll figure that out soon.
Yeah, and if obviously we'll be getting to taste the barrel picks that were selected on that trip last year throughout this year, I believe, hopefully. So if you don't like them, you can message Andrew and tell him how terrible, how terrible they are. But no,
Yeah, all the good picks were done by me, all the bad picks
yeah.
were done by Andrew. That works.
But yeah, no, absolutely. No, I trust Andrew's palate completely. So I'm very excited to taste them as they come out. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We will hopefully catch you at the next one. And some of you, I'll be seeing you in Canberra soon. I'm very excited. And yeah, take care, and I will, yeah, catch you later.